In these times when so much seems to depend upon our economic system, it might be well to take a very quick look at the history of money. We've had it a long time, but not as long as some people think, because in the earliest times of human remembrance, barter and exchange were the common means of distributing goods of all kinds. For instance, our word cattle comes from chattel mortgage, and the cattle were the basis of the wealth. Various countries have had practically every type of medium of exchange imaginable. The Chinese, during the imperial system, issued paper money. It was never very successful, nor well appreciated, but it was accepted because it was that or nothing. The actual amount of currency in circulation in China at any given time was based upon the number of deer in the imperial sheepfold and in the parks around the buildings. They counted the deer and then issued the currency. As long as they had the deer, they had money. Of course, it probably developed a little bit from the use of deerskin in the preparation of documents. The documents with the deerskin was from the imperial chambers of wisdom. All around we had cowrie shells, we had tobacco currency current in the Virginia colony, we had wampum, beadwork and shell work. We actually, in the Polynesians, had a currency of feathers, which would permit us to refer to the individual as a feather merchant. Perhaps that's where it came from. But anyway, everything you can think of was used as a medium of exchange. The theory began quite reasonably. After all, in the exchange of goods, it wasn't always convenient for the objects themselves to be the subjects of exchange. It was not necessarily easy to exchange sheep for goats or something, and then you had to take care of the animals that you had received. It was more simple to take a note of some kind to be used as you saw fit. Actually, also, this was true in Egypt. The Egyptian currency was issued privately, much of it, early currency, by wealthy families or by members of large community estates. The coins were simply little pieces of clay into which the scarab signet of the owner was pressed and dried to make a little kind of exchange item. These were used to buy and sell. When the time came to pay off, they were taken to the steward of the house, who gave them another form of exchange for them. Sometimes currency, sometimes goods that they wanted. So money gradually developed as a convenience and gradually unfolded and multiplied its pressures until it became the world's principal inconvenience. As a convenience, it made possible all types of merchandising and exchanging of goods. It became the basis of a system of exchange in which the individual was paid in a spendable material, which he could use as he must or as he saw fit. In those days, wages were not the problem they are today. In the very early times, money was more or less of a nuisance, because no one knew what to do with it. There was nothing to buy with it except what you already had. So for a long time, the situation kind of went along kind of unsuccessfully, until finally somebody caught on to the great idea that instead of making money, the individual could make money make money. This was a great thought and began a cycle of troubles which we may never recover from entirely. Wealth is something that has become intensified by our materialistic attitude toward life. Of all things that we deal with, wealth is the most perishable. Wealth can be utterly destroyed by a change of government. Wealth can be largely subdued and lost through natural disasters. Wealth can change hands through fraud and dishonesty, and when the final time comes, the individual departing from this life, no matter how much he has, cannot take 1 cent with him. To be born without the possibility of bringing your wealth with you and departing without being able to take it back with you to the unknown, we have a span of time right here in the material world in which wealth has become a fascinating subject. It is only in our times here that wealth has any meaning whatsoever. We think of time as being the way civilization grows. We think of time going on into the future, our children's children having wealth. We think of the past when certain wealthy persons became famous or infamous in history. But actually, the entire problem of wealth is surrounded by the inevitable fact of mortality. Mortality not only means you can't take it with you, but in a mysterious way, it has something to do with what does survive death. It has to do with character. It has to do with what you did with life, how honest you were, how thoughtful and careful, how generous and wise in the administration of wealth. We find, therefore, wealth can become one of the great temptations to whatever those forces are that operate after death. If we cheat long enough and deceive long enough, perhaps there is some punishment in the afterlife which we must face. We can't take the money with us, but perhaps we can take the regrets with us of how we got it and how we spent it. A lot of people, of course, those most profoundly influenced in money, probably are not very thoughtful as to what's going to happen to them after they pass on. They are going to assume that if there is an afterlife, that it will be something that they can control or something that they will face when it comes. But a great many people simply do not believe that there is an afterlife, which makes the problem of money still more difficult. You can't take it with you, and if you cease to exist, you don't know you ever had it. And this is a little discouraging to persons who built careers on the principle of wealth alone. So we have this matter of money and what to do with it, how to get it. And I think we have to realize that in a sense it is one of the great tests of living. It is something almost like an initiation rite in which the individual is faced with a variety of temptations. And if he expects to ascend in consciousness or understanding above a very mortal and materialistic level, he has to master the mystery of this medium. He has to find out how to use wealth as the basis of soul power. No, of course, everything can be used well and be the source of good, just as surely as it can be used badly and become the source of evil. But somewhere along the line, each human being's life, character, integrity, soul growth, if we want to call it that, all these are related to money. They are related in the same sense that we find in the Bible, where Jesus was betrayed for money. And ever since that time, truth has been betrayed for money. And individuals have sacrificed their inner life for the accumulation of wealth. Now, if the individual got a large sum of money and did something surprisingly good with it, there might be a little more excuse for the present existing system. But for the most part, he doesn't do very much good with what he has. A few do use philanthropic impulses and do support causes that are worthwhile. But for the majority of those of some wealth, if not the most wealthy, find it only an excuse for indolence. They discover they do not have to work. The money is going to work for them. They have no particular value or interest. I've known several very wealthy persons that really ran into the higher echelons of the plush and the affluent. Most of these that I have known had no interest in life that were worth anything. They were the members of the best clubs. They had great social activities. Some of them played a fair game of golf, but not as good a game as men with 1/10 their income. Then there were also constant extravagances. They owned vast houses which they could only use a small part of. They bought great estates. They gambled. They spent part of their time in Monte Carlo and probably some of the west of it up at Reno, one of our centers. These people lived comparatively useless lives. They were prime victims of narcotics because boredom itself was a sufficient cause for a poor life. They did not know what to do with money except to spend it, and they did not know how to spend it to make the slightest increase of their own personal well-being. They didn't use it to learn or to grow or to think. They used it simply because they had it and liked to compete with others of the same economic level. Therefore, the wealthy became famous. They became envied by the poor, and they went on through life just about as miserably as those with 1/100th of their incomes. This problem of wealth, therefore, simply ends up that if an individual doesn't have to think, he is not going to. If he doesn't have to work, he will find ways not to. If he does not wish to improve himself, he can stay the way he is. And the more money he has, the less tendency he has to improve his own character, increase his own skills, learn the professions, arts, and crafts which become interesting to those of less wealth. He simply does not have incentives because it is not necessary for him to make a living. Now, not being able to make a living, he has great trouble in making a life. His various wealths are envied by others. He is exploited, cheated, and deceived on every hand. And in the course of time, he finds his means a great burden upon his spirit. But having once set it up and established it, it is nothing but a depression that will break down the tremendous structure he has erected. Now, if we wanted to consider this in the philosophical sense of the word, we should say that every dollar has meaning. A dollar is given to a person either because he earns it or because it arrives in the monthly statements or however it comes. The dollar is not only something to spend, it is a challenge upon integrity. The money that we have is a challenge to right use, and it is much wiser in the process of growing to use small means well than to waste great means. Actually, we have, therefore, a definite realization that the more we have, the more we must be in order to use it well. The more we have of this world's materials and luxuries, the greater the responsibility we have for intelligent, conscientious, creative living. This doesn't mean that we have to go out and give away all our wealth, because the person who doesn't understand money is going to give it to the wrong people anyway. He is going to create a group of sycophants that have no meaning, no significance, and no value. To give away money is almost as difficult as to get it, and sometimes more difficult, because practically always the individual who becomes too wealthy pays for this wealth with the loss of the sincerity of those around him, the deceit of his own family, and a constant drain upon his way of thinking, dreaming, hoping, and fearing. These things are all conditioned by his means or by his wealth. So we can say to ourselves, we're in a world now in which wealth is probably the great ruler. We are in a world where to have and to try to hold is the supreme achievement. The individual and the community both are fighting desperately for financial control of life. All over the world there are millionaires, billionaires, and a few trillionaires, but not one of these very highly moneyed people seem to be doing the things that need to be done. They are trying to buy protection for themselves, but they do not know much about doing anything worthwhile with the monies that they have. Now, there are some who are much wiser, but the majority of people, particularly those in the upper financial realm, not quite to the top, those very well-to-do, are the ones who seemingly have the greatest difficulty. Those who are very wealthy find very often that it is useful, even profitable, to give away something of what they have. Now, how do we want to work that in this particular time? Is it possible for us to get rid of this medium? Would the world be better if it could go back on a barter system? The answer is it can't go back anyway. The way of life as it is at the present time is so tied into the profit system that there is no way of completely extricating itself without a major change in the temperaments, dispositions, and convictions of people. The only remedy for the money problem is intelligence. Not only skill in barter, but intelligence of insight, understanding, a realization of the use and the proper use of all that we have, and the use of it for the greatest good of the greatest number. This proposition is not at the present time very much in sight, although we are beginning to feel pretty seriously and becoming rather weary with the miseries of an economic system that is out of control. It is out of control for a number of different reasons. Now, the basis of all use and abuse goes back to the consciousness of the person who, for one reason or another, has acquired worldly goods. His own inner life must direct the use of what he has. Therefore, from the very beginning of time, philosophy became a method of learning dealing primarily with usage, with the proper use of what you have, the way to take what you have and expend it to the benefit of yourself and others. So philosophy begins to create in the mind a discipline upon the mere accumulation of worldly goods. The person with a good philosophic insight can develop ways of using what he has to his own improvement and to his own pleasure at the same time, and to the service of others. So philosophy has to do with controlling the entire theory of money. It is one of those things that philosophy was essentially created for. For philosophy is a link between religion and science. Philosophy binds the ideals of religion to the practical principles of science. So with philosophy, science can be lifted out of the exploiting phase of itself, and religion can be applied more directly and easily to the common concerns of daily living, so that the philosopher is a moderator between the extremes of life. His place in the problem of wealth is very obvious, that he must become a director of his own means. He must learn how to use what he has. If he does not use it, he will abuse it. If he does not find the proper way of distributing or disseminating his possessions, he will make mistakes and contribute to the general misery of mankind. Begin with, then, the very simple problem that wealth is essentially a material situation. We have no indications whatever that outside of the material universe there is any understanding or consideration of the concept of wealth. Wealth does not exist apart from objects which are in themselves valuable. In the ancient world, the most valuable object was gold. Therefore, wherever possible, it became the highest medium of exchange. All of the mediums of exchange, strangely enough, fall under the planetary system. They become parts of a solar system of metals and materials from which exchange and purchase and loss are figured. And every one of the materials, as found in the astronomical parallels, each one of them has responsibilities. Of course, you can understand that gold would always be associated with the sun. Gold is a symbol of light. It is a symbol of radiance. It is a symbol of giving all to creation. Gold is therefore as a symbol of the sun's power. It means it is the life giver to everything that lives. And wherever gold is, or currency is perverted, there is an eclipse of the sun, so to say. If something is turned away. The sun is a giver of life to all things, great and small. It is the nourisher of the old and the young. It carries on through space, through all the kingdoms of nature. It creates food, it creates everything that we know, and therefore was the primary symbol of divinity in ancient times. Therefore, in a sense, gold is a divine metal and should always be used exactly as deity would want it to be used, to bring light, life, truth, happiness, and security to all living things. The sun is not selfish or self-centered and never was. It has supported the world by giving of itself without any limit since the dawn of the beginning of existence. The next in value, of course, is silver, which we tie to the moon. When a nation can't stay on the gold standard, it gets on the silver standard. Silver is the second. Silver is the proletarian medium of exchange. The silver is the gold of the less opulent. The symbol of the silver is therefore utility and usefulness. Silver protects and encourages the private industries of life. It is the medium of the farmer, the merchant, those who have of limited means, but have also the means of continual exchange. Silver is also the metal of charity, of insight, of kindness, of sharing. It is a common medium that holds families together and tightens the relationships of nations. So silver is the second power. The third power is Saturn. And strangely enough, Saturn is associated with lead. Now, if you go back into numismatics, or the science of money, you will find that there were, at various times, lead currencies. Lead currencies had one shortcoming: weight. They were very heavy. An individual with a substantial bank account in lead required several people to carry his money around. This wasn't very practical. But Saturn as lead had to do also with the idea of the weight of money, the weight of wealth. We slip it in our pocket to say it weighs nothing, but it weighs more really than anyone has ever guessed. For the weight of it is psychological. The weight of it is that of itself, like lead, it is nothing. But when worshipped, it becomes the heaviest burden that flesh can carry. The next one of this is Jupiter. And Jupiter is associated with tin. And tin has been used as currency. Coinage has been made by alloys of tin. And it has become the symbol of the distribution of wealth. Jupiter is the power of something not so precious that goes down into the common distribution of things. Tin is small change in a sense, but it is also something that is very useful for the development of all kinds of projects. The contributions of the poor to the improvement of themselves belongs under the arrangement of Jupiter, because the poor person still gives to someone poorer than himself. This is the gift of tin, the benevolence of Jupiter. Next comes iron, Mars. And iron money was quite common in ancient times. It became also a symbol of the use of money for offense and defense. In other words, iron was the symbol of the war fund, the symbol of the making of an armament and things of this nature. But it was also basically the symbol of the building of things. Iron was a metal used in construction. It used to build buildings and make coins. It had to do with all kinds of improvements in society and lasting culture of civilization. It was not intended primarily to be a weapon. And in the Bible we learn how swords were pounded into plowshares, and that is what we do not know now. But this form of currency is that by which we can change from weapons to utensils that are necessary for the common good. Below this we have another line, Venus, copper. Copper was used very definitely for money of many parts of the world. In fact, in the Roman Empire, they debased their silver coinage by coating copper with a thin silver wash. Coppers is still a term. It's a small change in some countries. And it is therefore the symbol of the small daily use of things, more or less the allotment of funds for food or for education, the paycheck coming in to be distributed among the debts and other responsibilities of family. But copper was definitely a symbol of the use of money in the maintenance of family life and the education of children and the common works of nature. The last of these groups is mercury. And mercury was an ancient symbol for the alloys, the mixed metals, and those which were used to make coins when other consistencies were rare or difficult. Also, the symbol of mercury or quicksilver may relate to that small change which is quick to disappear and does not leave a rack behind, but does leave debts in its wake. So all these symbols were used to represent mediums of exchange, and in the various nations of the world these were developed and classified and became the basis of great systems of currency. Today we have a problem, and this problem has not really to do with the matter of a medium of exchange. It has to do with a situation that can only endure as long as the human being is willing to stake everything for the moment and is perfectly willing to be bankrupt next month. It is the tremendous gamble of life that has created much of our trouble and difficulty. Money now then becomes a heavy burden on us. So we must take it into the philosophy, take it into the wisdom religions, and find out why we have it. Why is the individual, who is obviously easily tempted, given such temptations? Why have we had given to us the supreme mistake, which we are expected to determine for ourselves, understand, and correct? How does it happen that the human being, whose own internal life is rather insecure, and whose integrities are not well developed, why should he be given the temptation of the most dangerous circumstance or factor existing in the world, wealth? Wealth is not bad, but wealth is the basis of the release of cupidity in people. Wealth is something that will raise temptation when every other inducement fails. Wealth is something for which the person is perfectly willing to barter his own soul, and does. So therefore, wealth must be something very, very difficult to face. Also, tied to wealth are practically all of the improvements that we need to strengthen the integrities of society. If we could cure the sickness of wealth, nearly every other ailment that we have would be rapidly diminished. A very large part of crime is based upon wealth, based upon the desire to secure means, dishonestly or in any way possible, but to secure them. So we have a very common factor here, the cause of crime, of deceit, of poverty, and of all kinds of abuses of human life. Wealth can abuse health, it can destroy legislative processes, it can corrupt all of the institutions of education, policy, and industry. Wealth is the supreme misuse, and yet it carries within itself the possibility of being one of the most powerful constructive forces possible. So we are torn between this situation. We are trying to understand how, at this time in world affairs, where debts in every direction are beyond calculation, how to get out of this trouble, how to find the answer to the problem. To find it, we have to go to where we always have had to go, to the inner part of ourselves. We will not find the answer among the economists. They do not know. We will not find it by shifting governments. We will not find it by signing treaties or making economic pacts. These things are broken every 5 minutes. The only way that we can actually correct the situation is to cure the basic selfishness of individuals. And this basic selfishness is the most dangerous ailment the world has ever known. It has been responsible for hundreds of wars and billions of human lives. It is something that should have long ago revealed its fallacy. But because it is habit-forming, much like cocaine or hashish, it is something that once the individual is hooked, it is very difficult for him to get off the hook. It is something that he gradually builds his whole life around and depends upon completely. And yet in so doing he realizes that he is competing with millions of others just as selfish and self-centered as himself. And in the long run of things, there is more poverty in the world than there is wealth, simply because the individual is incapable of changing his own mind. So we talk about reforms of one kind or another. We talk about people meditating to improve health. We talk about people praying for the virtues of life. We hear about some who work very hard to attain some type of independence from the confusion of our daily existence. But we do not find many people who outwardly and firmly pray to be relieved of the burden of wealth. Yet it's the heaviest burden that they must bear. Now, in order to get rid of the burden of it, we have to realize the wisdom of Socrates, who on all matters said, in things not too much. The great problem of economic distribution is moderation. If there were no misuses, no vast accumulations, and everything was fairly and reasonably administered, wealth would gradually become what it was intended to be, a medium of exchange. It would be a way in which the individual could exchange his skills and for other skills that he does not possess. That he create with his hands things that he wants, that others may like and will exchange something for. All of the wealth system has to become a matter basically of exchange. Now, some things do not exchange easily, nor immediately. Therefore, certain amounts of money can be held in reserve with symbols to represent matters that are too intangible or too complicated to depend upon barter. But at the same time, if everything is based on exchange rather than on profit, we will have a different type of world. And the ancients had a symbol of a serpent swallowing its own tail, and this is very largely the picture of our present economic plight. The snake is eating itself to death out of its own flesh, and will someday eat itself up to its neck, and that will be the end. The Egyptians were very acute on these symbols. They were very astute. So it becomes very important to find out how to use and not abuse the resources that experience has given to us. We can also find that if we take the pressure off of some of these things, that we can do a great deal to make things less complicated. Now we are working now on the processes of armament. Billions of dollars are going into armament. What is the armament doing? What is it for? It is very largely a means by which one country or one dictator hopes to get hold of the wealth of another. The whole war is over profit, over some form of gain, better land, more crops, greater industries. Each one of the so-called dictators is really out to control the wealth of other countries. and in controlling this wealth to reduce these other countries to slave estates. This constant warfare there over wealth will continue as long as wealth is a contrivance by which individuals can enslave each other. As long as it is possible to bind an individual to poverty while exploiting him, it's going to be very difficult to get rid of these problems. Now, on the other side of this particular coin, we also have the idea of a common commodity of wealth, that all shall have the same. This has been tried, but it fails for another reason. And the reason this fails is that it destroys all incentives. The individual in this world does not wish to be equal. He wishes to be a little more or a little superior to those around him. This superiority originally was skill, wisdom, spiritual insight, courage, all of these things. Now this little edge of superiority is largely vested in wealth. The one who has more has a strange, subtle superiority, and whether they realize it or not, they receive the adulation of those who have a little less. This entire theory is wrong. But we come into a world where, for some unknown reason, we came here. The world was a pretty pleasant place, according to the rumors, at that time. But we came here with the capacity to destroy it. Now, this is something that seems strange. How does it happen that eternity is built into the living creature all of these means of its own utter destruction? Or if we don't want to say utter destruction, at least a very serious diminishment of privileges and opportunities. Why do we come here without realizing or without accepting the fallacy of accumulation? What are we going to accumulate? If we accumulate enough, we become the victims of crime. Buddha pointed up this very, very clearly, and I suppose no one has really given very much thought to what he said. But Buddha was perfectly convinced that as long as the individual believed that wealth was power and security, and that wealth and power in the way we use it is security for anything, he's in trouble. Buddha pointed out definitely that there was no peace, no contentment from the accumulation of worldly goods. The individual is entitled to that which is necessary. He is entitled to the small common luxuries that make his life more secure. He may be well entrusted with socialized medicine, which he will abuse, but he still is entitled to certain social protections. He has various things of moderate natures which he is entitled to. Beyond this, he is ambitious. And the more ambitious he becomes, the more someone else is deprived of a livelihood. They just cannot work it any other way. Every invention makes unemployment. And while the story is, of course, heavily debated, the fact remains that gradually inventions, skills, and these things are going to take a very heavy toll on employment in all parts of the world. We are still in a transition period, and employment will endure still for a time. But ultimately, we will invent our way out of work, and this way face a future of uncertainty. Well, we can say it might be very good to work ourselves out of work. Maybe we would be much happier if we never worked at all. Maybe we should remember the days in the ancient times when a primitive man could reach up and pick his dinner off of a tree. Maybe this is what it should be. But as we watch this very carefully, we find that those who do not work are not as happy as those who do. We find that the individual who is not under some obligation is pretty much of a wreck. The only way you can get out of work and survive is to change your point of energy. If instead of going out and working, society produced you a complete security, then you have your time, a great deal of time. And that time should be used for the essential purpose that the time was bestowed in the first place, to contribute to growth. Time was not something to be wasted. Time was not something to be cast aside in moments of indifference. To be relieved of work and spend eternities looking at television programs would be a very bad exchange. Even the watchers couldn't stand it very long. Actually, therefore, the less work we have to do, the more demand upon our internal resources. The reason why nature slowly produces a certain abundance is that creatures have something to do that must be above the level of simple maintenance. Now, this also applies to moderate wealth, because wealth provides the individual with an opportunity to study, to master arts, and do all kinds of useful things. But the richer he gets, the less he does, because he doesn't have to. So it is very necessary that the misplacement or displacement of labor should result, therefore, in this time being something bought, something precious, something valuable, something that has been deeded to us in a way for our advancement. Every person who isn't busy should find something to develop the strength of his inner life. He needs to grow as a human being. When he was enslaved and had to work 7 days a week and 12 to 14 hours a day in order to eat, he had very little opportunity to think. And yet some of the most beautiful thoughts in the world come from that period. But where he has every opportunity for leisure, where work becomes less and less arduous, where time is mostly available, where he has plenty of opportunity to do almost anything he wants to do, the time has now come that he should want to do what he should do. And in doing it that way, in approaching it that way, gradually control the excesses by which he has burdened his life. If the person moderated his interests and realized that the development of his internal life was more intense and more important than accumulation of a vast amount of comparatively useless material things, if he would realize this, a large part of the pressure of world economy would relax. It is this constant extravagance that keeps everybody in hot water and also makes every merchant dishonorable. All of these factors tell us very simply that the cure to the false belief that wealth is security is to gradually discover that the wealthy are possibly among the most insecure of human beings, and that the real security lies in the victory of self over circumstance. It arises from the individual becoming sufficient to his own needs in practically every area of his existence. This doesn't mean that he has to settle down and be a bored intellectual or something of that nature, because most of the problems, most of the things that really give us happiness are not of great value financially, but have been exploited in one way or another. Today, if you want a view of the desert, you may have to pay $500 for a weekend there. But that is not because the desert is charging it. It is because an individual has found a way to get that money from somebody else, and is discovering to his great joy that he is always going to be able to get it. This makes it very bad, because it destroys the values of life. In the last few years, practically every cultural resource has been exploited. Everything that my individual might really do to make him a little better person, a little more thoughtful person, has been either eliminated or expanded economically until it becomes a heavy burden. Our theaters have fallen down into the economic slum. Our libraries are placing books, most of which have nothing to do with the final development of human character. Our schools do not teach the right things, and our churches are so concerned with building more and bigger churches that they have very little time to really get down and tell the parishioners what's wrong with them. The employee tells the boss what he thinks of him, he loses his job. And everyone has to play along in a kind of hypocrisy to maintain the status that he has already established. All of this should finally break down. It is breaking in some areas. Some nations haven't gotten to this point yet, and they're fortunate, and we hope that world change will never force them to take on the conditions with which the major nations are confronted. The world powers of today are confronted with the heaviest responsibilities and burdens ever known in the history of mankind. These are responsibilities that have resulted from centuries of bad thinking, centuries devoted to wrong objectives, centuries and thousands of years in which tyranny has been allowed to dominate human relationships. So these things have to have something done to them, and there's only one way for the average person, and that is to do it for himself. Now we can say, if you try to really make a better pattern of life, are you going to lose all your friends? Are you going to be the one they do not promote? Are you going to be the person who has to step from a prosperous position to an inferior one, maybe land on the breadline? No, because that isn't the way the intention was set up. The inside life of the individual is his own. He can do with it exactly as he pleases to do with it. If he wishes to be honorable, he can be. And fortunately, in most cases, a reasonable amount of integrity is recognized and accepted. An individual who is not bound to some elaborate program of wealth has a greater chance to be honest, because he is not afraid of losing something he never had. But if he has built up a great material structure and tries to be a reformer, he faces the loss of all that he has built up. As one man said, however, years ago, what is a man worth if he loses everything he has? Probably more than he was before, because he has had a big lesson, and that's where the rewards come. And the man is better off that when he loses what he has than when he compromises what he is. Now, we're living in a world of compromise, which is bringing with it crime, all kinds of terrorism, and everything you can think of. And it is all a great monument to a completely mistaken attitude towards life. Even today, if you start talking seriously about religion, you're going to have a very divided opinion. Most people are not at all inclined to give religion its full weight, for the reason that most religious organizations have not set suitable examples to bring confidence to their followers. Actually, the main problem is that we have to fall back upon the realization of universal law. We have to realize that in spite of everything we think, believe, and want to know, that we are in a universe in which values are not fixed by mankind, and success is not measured in terms of worldly goods. It makes no difference how much wealth a person has. If he is sick, he hurts just the same. And if he leaves this wealth behind him, he may be doing no more than bringing trouble, responsibility, and loss to his descendants. Therefore, the beginning of our reform has to be the recognition in ourselves of value, that we shall be content with reasonable economic situations, that if we have a good job, paying enough so that we live comfortably and pleasantly and enjoy some reasonable luxuries that are within our plan, then we are really the most successful people in the world. But when we cannot stand it without a yacht, we are already failures. Because no matter what happens, the inside appetites have been abused. The individual who has the right angle will be unable to be self-satisfied unless he grows. He must find his advancements in the accomplishment of greater values in his own life. The man who really wants to grow is looking for a better insight, and the man who doesn't care anything about it is looking for more worldly goods. The worldly goods, however, is another problem attached to it. The average person is not very well equipped to interpret his own future beyond the present life. We're really not too sure We have very strong convictions and beliefs, and they may be right, but the individual who has various beliefs on the individuals do not necessarily all have the correct belief. Supposing when the rich man dies that he has a little trouble because it is said that it is more difficult for him to enter heaven than to pass through the eye of a needle. This is the idea that wealth can become the greatest impairment of life after death. It is the same type of thing that we find in the ancient mythologies, where there was nearly always a weighing of the soul in the afterlife, and the reward was given to those who had lived well and not those who had had much. There is no indication that anyone has ever bought his own salvation. He may have built a cathedral and paid for it, but if his own life was not proper, he has not bought salvation. The actual problem, therefore, is how long range is human existence? Supposing we are eternal beings, and supposing that in a certain life we make a whole lot of mistakes. We chisel people, we cheat them, we corrupt our goods, we do all kinds of unfair things, gain a great profit, and leave a fortune to our descendants. What is this in terms of man's spiritual integrity? Where is he going? He is going from here to a place where money means absolutely nothing. He is going to a place where wealth does not exist. He is going to a place which, if it exists at all, is ruled over by utter integrity. Yet this is not a place where an individual is simply punished because he dies. But it can very well be a place of unfinished business, where the individual who has never met the challenge of his own individual integrity will be given further tests in that direction. And it's very possible, if we believe the Buddhist point of view, that many of those who come into the world to face all kinds of economic mysteries and miseries are simply paying old debts for what they did someday back to another. So therefore, if we want to be citizens of the larger world, if we want to be part of a great universal program of integrities, the thing to do is to start now. And if everyone had enough to be quiet and simple and appropriate, and those who had a little more shared this in order to make it possible, and everyone was more interested in growing than they were in groaning under the weight of their infirmities, we might have in the end a world in which the monetary symbol would be restored. It says on the bill that it's $1, and on one side of our $1 bill is the Pyramid of Giza, the symbol of one of the ancient temples of initiation. This country, in a sense, is a sort of test. This is an alchemical laboratory, and up to the present time we have succeeded mostly in blowing it up. We have done all kinds of experiences and experiments and made ourselves sick doing it. Actually, a nation like this is a great unit of world culture, a great unit of spiritual integrities. When a nation fails, it is just as dismal as when some individual collapses morally or ethically. And yet we see a nation which could become and should become one of the greatest powers for good that ever existed. A nation which came into being in the search for liberties, for the search for religious integrities. That this country should get completely bogged down in this tremendous problem of debt seems to be a little bit unrealistic. It doesn't seem necessary that we should make a caricature out of the monetary system. It doesn't seem that we ought to take people of very little worth and give them fortunes, that the individual works only for money, that the individual who already has $1 million a year salary is going to have a bad time because they won't give him another $1 million every year as a raise. He produces nothing particularly. The great wealth goes to the individuals who have neither great abilities nor great opportunities. It just is something that is part of a system of fantasy, part of a delusion of material exploitation. So gradually we are going to go on and on until we never have enough money to pay anybody's salaries. This is very wrong, and it doesn't seem at all necessary here. We were a nation which was established to correct the misfortunes, mistakes, and sins of the past. We were put here because it was a clean country, a clean land, incidentally occupied by just a few people, the American Indians, who were probably more honest than we are. These differences of getting away from the old nations, getting away from Europe, didn't work too well, because those who came brought Europe with them. They brought their own selfishness, their own self-centeredness, and in the first year they were here, they exiled some of their own members into the snowy wilderness to die. And they would have, perhaps, if kindly Indians hadn't picked them up. So we started in by misusing the very thoughts that we have. And now we have a great world misuse. But, of course, there is another side to this. We can see gradually that the mistakes are impossible. Day by day, in every way, we are becoming more disillusioned with the mistakes we are making. We are gradually realizing that we are destroying the very securities which we seek to maintain. That in absolute exploitation of each other, we lose the divine right to integrities and securities, and that somewhere out there there's a power that can punish this when necessary, and will do so. That power has brought down one civilization after another for its delinquencies. And if we do not behave ourselves a little better, the least we may look forward to is the collapse of our economic system. But it is not necessary for it to collapse. It is necessary only that it be intelligently reorganized, so that the purpose of it is what it was intended to be in the first place, a means by which human beings would be capable of enjoying growth and progress and information, that it would support education and health, and that all that we needed would be ours because nature produced this abundance. It is very hard to honor this in the sense of our present thinking. We are desperately concerned with all this exploitation, and it is coming to us in moral crime, it is coming to us in actual crime, in terrorism, in narcotics, and all these things. The terrorism is mercenary, the narcotics are big business, gangs are dishonestly stealing the wealth. Everything is after wealth, and in the course of getting it, fighting war after war, in which innocent people, at least those innocent of the major delinquencies, are forced to suffer and die. So we've got to get hold of this, and we've got to get hold of it with a full realization that the profit system, as we know, will only function constructively on a very narrow margin of profit. It will not permit us to do the inconceivable and unreasonable things. It will not make it practical for us to continue to inflate values and deflate integrities. So we have this little matter to work on, that wealth is the source of most of our evils, but can be, if properly used, a medium of exchange by means of which we can bind the whole world together in one commonwealth. We can share all our goods by means of symbols, these symbols being money. We can gain from one and give to another without carrying the whole cargo with us. We can find ways to improve life, we can strengthen education, we can deepen religion, all by the proper use of the resources that we have. But as long as these resources are devoted very largely to the perpetuation of intemperance and actual stupidity, it's not going to be very easy to bring a happy world into existence. So I think if we can start by just thinking about this a little bit,
that when we go out to buy, that we consider for a moment the values involved, that we do not simply go out to spend money, that when things are exorbitantly priced, we just don't buy them. When we are invited to buy something that is detrimental to the common good, we don't buy it. When prices are falsely inflated, we just don't purchase the article. A very short time, intelligence in these areas will produce magnificent results. There's no doubt in the world that the entertainment world can be completely revised if the individual requires it. We can have any kind of entertainment we want by simply refusing to support the wrong kind. We can have any education that we want as long as we do not send our children to schools that are inadequate. We can have all the jobs that we want if we will employ people on reasonable bases and the profits of growth are fairly distributed among those who earn them. All these things can be done, but they must be demanded. So the big decision sometimes is this: do I want to help the world to grow, or must I buy this condominium with a view for $375,000 next week? And it is standing on a sand patch that 25 years ago you could bought the land under it for about $50. All these tremendous inflations, the $50,000 and $60,000 automobiles are so scarce today that you have to leave your orders months in advance. This is all very foolish. It belongs to a kind of wealth that is headed to bankruptcy and belongs there. On the other hand, if we have what we want and what we need and are kind and pleasant about it and use reasonable self-control, we would find that in a very short time our available funds would increase moderately, and we would be able to have the various pleasures and pleasantries which normal people are entitled to. There is no reason why happiness must depend entirely on the intake of hard liquors. There is no reason why we simply can't live without some extravagant vacation. I saw in the paper the other day a wonderful opportunity. You can get a 10% discount on a certain vacation spot, which will bring it down to $275 a day. These things are simply ridiculous, but people don't believe it. Or if they do believe it, they say nothing, and you find an individual who is behind in the payments on his furniture in one of those $275 rooms. We are losing the fact that we are living in a universe of ethics. We are living in a kind of world in which stupidity will never survive. It has to be integrity. No one is right there with a stick to tell us we can't do it. The corners of our world are not held by armed guards, nor are the streets of our cities patrolled by angels and demons. But the actual laws of ruling things are inflexible. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. And every cause has an effect that is equal to it. Extravagance has as its effect poverty. War has as its effect misery. All these causes and effects are immutable. No one has ever broken one of these cycles yet, and they're not going to. The only way you can get out of these cycles is to outgrow them. And the only way of outgrowing them is to live above them. The individual who is above certain conduct reminds us of the definition of the superior man by Confucius. A superior man is one who is above an inferior act, who will not compromise under any conditions, will suffer if necessary to protect the rights of other people to live in a civilized and well-ordered existence. So we have to think of this money problem because it is the great tempter. It is the marvelous figure, the great fantasy, the magnificent illusion by which we are all tempted to destroy everything that is important. It is this illusion that is corrupting our children. It is this illusion that is bringing criticism against our system all over the world. And it is also the same illusion that allows us to criticize all the other nations. The whole problem is one that for some unknown reason, 5 billion human beings have united to make the same mistakes for no good reason. And the only ones we can find anywhere now in which there seems to be a little trace of happiness are the Aborigines, who haven't found out about it yet. But they'll go join up very shortly now. And then we will say that we have made a great step forward. We are going to be able to say we have eliminated literacy, but have not contributed anything to intelligence. We are going to find all kinds of phony advancements. We are going to talk about bathtubs and outhouses. We're going to talk about dirt floors and chimneys. But the great problem remains. This world has got to learn to live right. It has got to learn to keep the peace. It's got to learn to avoid these temptations and inducements which lead to tyranny and terror. And every one of these inducements is backed by the monetary concept. It is backed by the concept of wealth. To get it, to keep it, and to take it away from somebody else. This type of thing can never result in peace, and never result in a security for people. It'll never help our children to grow up with decent characters. It won't get us out of dope or crime. All these things are linked today directly to being financially profitable to someone. And that someone is using nefarious, corrupt means to increase a fortune for himself or members of his particular tribe or group. Now, there's no use trying to go out and fight about it, because you can't fight a majority successfully. But you do not have to join them. You can do what you believe to be best for you, and what you can live with if you are a decent and well-intentioned person. If we believe in deity, we can ask in prayer or meditation for the courage and the strength to live right. We can work and ask and beseech the eternal power to give us the strength to be our true selves. And if we do this, this eternal power, it will be inside of ourselves. And when we call upon the best of ourselves, that will answer. But when we only call upon the inside to show us how to make a fast dollar, the answer is more dangerous than the question. It all begins by trying to orient our own concepts of what constitutes a universe. What it means to be a solar system, or what it means to be a planet with all the living things that are on it. These living things are valuable, important. We must protect them, we must value them, and we must also value people. We must do everything that we can to prevent the human being from becoming an endangered species. And he's trying that just as hard as he can at the present moment. The restoration of religions could be a great help. It could be a great means if we could get our idealistic philosophies working. Perhaps the only thing we really desperately need is common sense. The factual situation. We would see ourselves every day doing things we wouldn't want our children to do even now. So we have to work with all this problem. But wealth, as it is now, is the great destroyer. And if there be any symbol appropriate for the demons, they would be the dollars. They are the things that are giving us the big headache. We all need them, but we are going to have a new attitude toward them. we're going to have to find ways of determining how to use them, how to make these dollars help humanity to become integrated on a higher level of personal conduct. If enough people, if 1 out of 100 of the people here on this planet really united their efforts in a consistent pattern of refusing to be corrupted by false advertising, false propaganda, and false entertainment and education, we would find a major change immediately. The media today is feeling this. The media is being hit. People are beginning to be a little more discriminating. And that is another phase that we have to remember, that no matter what happens, evil is forever destroying itself. Evil is always going a little too far and destroying its own structure. Every good thing joins with every good thing for the improvement of all. Evils individually do not join each other. They do not work together even in evil. They break against each other. They are in conflict. They are in constant competition with themselves. Therefore they die. It is only cooperation that bestows eternal life and the possibility of fulfilling the realities of our existence. So it's a symbol problem. We're all interested in symbols. We're interested in meditating on them. So perhaps we should meditate on the great symbol of the dollar and find out what's wrong with it. And we're wrong with ourselves because we have allowed ourselves to take a venerating attitude towards a symbol of exchange. Meditation upon the dollar may tell us what to do with it. It may give us an insight as to how it could be used correctly. We could say to ourselves, this dollar, where could it go where it would do the greatest good to the greatest number? This could be an interesting experiment. You never really have to do it, but you can think it through and see what you would do with that dollar if you were concerned with accomplishing the greatest good for the world in which you live. What would that $1 do? Then you might even have the feeling of doing that thing. But always by the meditation upon what we have, we reveal what we are. The moment we settle down to enjoy selfishness or pass over it lightly, we are realizing weaknesses in our own natures. The greatest source of integrity that we know is inside of ourselves. The greatest source of progress for humanity actually is within ourselves, because it is in ourselves that our God dwells. Deity works through us. It comes in us and through us into the world. Every human being can become an instrument for the evolution of humanity, for the fulfillment of all good, and recognize that instead of being just lonely little people living our years the best we can, that we are the instruments of a high destiny, that we are the instruments of an immutable power. If we choose to leave the instruments dull, if we choose not even try to use them, then we have that type of attitude. But there is within each individual the power to do better than he does. There is not one human being who could not improve a little, at least, if he tried real hard. And many could improve a great deal with a very light trial. But it's always true that if somehow we're going to have to divide the sheep from the goats, we're going to have to find out in living things how to break the vicious circle of war, poverty, and crime. Policemen can't do it. All the peace organizations in the world can't do it. And all the talk and discussion in high political places won't do it either. The only thing that can secure these things is that individuals themselves make single steps individually in the direction they know these things should be properly handled. We know, for instance, that any individual who does not buy cocaine is not contributing to the drug mania. But if he buys it himself, he is part of a vast group that is producing multimillionaires while you watch them. But you don't have to be part of this. You don't have to do anything that is wrong that does not interfere with the daily problems of life. You may not enjoy your job, but if it is an honest job and you're doing the best you can with it, or you're living on retirement and living as honestly and wisely and lovingly as you can, these things are okay. That's right. Everything's going fine. But if you have a few extra dollars come along and insist on investing them in organized crime, you will find the difficulties multiply almost immediately. Heaven doesn't want it that way. We are all here to grow. And up to the moment, money is the greatest impairment to growth that we have. And if we can cure that one, almost all the other difficulties will begin to fall apart, because they are all motivated by greed. They are all motivated by jealousy. They are by over-ambition. When these things are curbed within the individual, his health will be better. The individual who lives his principles is likely to live considerably longer. He will have fewer doctor's bills, and he'll have more friends and a closer family. We are sacrificing the values that we really know for the things that don't mean anything anyway. So I think we should very definitely try to make personal contributions. If there's something that you know inside yourself that needs correcting, it can start with something as subtle and mysterious as disposition, or attitude, or fanaticism, or hatreds of some nature, or jealousies. If you can gradually wean out the negative reactions that you have to the things that happen every day, you will begin to develop a new strength. When you can resist the temptations that tempt you, you can begin to resist the temptations with which others try to tempt you. You can become gradually a center of integrity in this curious world. And by becoming a center of integrity, you are gradually going to accomplish that which is necessary. If the American people will be true to their heritage, if they will be true to the things that they know were part of their proper destiny, if we realize that we were here to help the world to grow, and that all the arts and sciences that we have, as Lord Bacon pointed out, all these great research structures, the great laboratories, are not there to churn out pills for $10 a pill. They are there to see that individuals have what they need. All growth, all progress, all success is rewarded in terms of integrities and not in terms of cash. So we are supposed to be building a better world. We were here to take a beautiful continent and make it the glory of the ages. We were to make it not the abode of the wealthy, but the abode of the righteous. It was to be the place where the dreams of the ages come true. It can still be. Maybe that's why this problem is getting so intense. Maybe this economic problem is the one last great hurdle that we have to solve before we can achieve our destiny. Because the universal reformation of our own selfishness can make us the hope of the ages. There's no use trying to outbid the world or outproduce the world. What we should do is to stand as a symbol of something higher and better than can be found elsewhere, and in that way inspire the world to the fulfillment of its proper destiny, so that there can truly be one people, one God, and one nature. All these things can happen and begin simply with a simple process of dedicating and rededicating your personal life to values that are real. Well, that's it, folks.
Of course, it probably developed a little bit from the use of deerskin in the preparation of documents. The documents with the deerskin was from the imperial chambers of wisdom. All around we had cowrie shells, we had tobacco currency current in the Virginia colony, we had wampum, beadwork, and shell work. We actually, in the Polynesians, had a currency of feathers, which would permit us to refer to the individual as a feather merchant. Perhaps that's where it came from. But anyway, everything you can think of was used as a medium of exchange. The theory began quite reasonably. After all, in the exchange of goods, it wasn't always convenient for the objects themselves to be the subjects of exchange. It was not necessarily easy to exchange sheep for goats or something, and then you had to take care of the animals that you had received. It was more simple to take a note of some kind to be used as you saw fit. Actually, also, this was true in Egypt. The Egyptian currency was issued privately, much of it, early currency, by wealthy families or by members of large community estates. The coins were simply little pieces of clay into which the scarab not only means you can't take it with you, but in a mysterious way it has something to do with what does survive death. It has to do with character. It has to do with what you did with life, how honest you were, how thoughtful and careful, how generous and wise in the administration of wealth. We find, therefore, wealth can become one of the great temptations to whatever those forces are that operate after death. If we cheat long enough and deceive long enough, perhaps there is some punishment in the afterlife which we must face. We can't take the money with us, but perhaps we can take the regrets with us of how we got it and how we spent it. A lot of people, of course, those most profoundly influenced in money, probably are not very thoughtful as to what's going to happen to them after they pass on. They are going to assume that if there is an afterlife, that it will be something that they can control or something that they will face when it comes. But a great many people simply do not believe that there is an afterlife, which makes the problem of money still more difficult. You can't take it with you, and if you cease to exist, you don't know you ever had it. And this is a little discouraging to persons who built careers on the principle of wealth alone. So we have this matter of money and what to do with it, how to get it, that has become intensified by our materialistic attitude toward life. Of all things that we deal with, wealth is the most perishable. Wealth can be utterly destroyed by a change of government. Wealth can be largely subdued and lost through natural disasters. Wealth can change hands through fraud and dishonesty, and when the final time comes, the individual departing from this life, no matter how much he has, cannot take 1 cent with him. To be born without the possibility of bringing your wealth with you and departing without being able to take it back with you to the unknown, we have a span of time right here in the material world in which wealth has become a fascinating subject. It is only in our times here that wealth has any meaning whatsoever. We think of time as being the way civilization grows. We think of time going on into the future, our children's children having wealth. We think of the past when certain wealthy persons became famous or infamous in history. But actually, the entire problem of wealth is surrounded by the inevitable fact of mortality. Mortality in these times when so much seems to depend upon our economic system, it might be well to take a very quick look at the history of money. We've had it a long time, but not as long as some people think. Because in the earliest times of human remembrance, barter and exchange were the common means of distributing goods of all kinds. For instance, our word cattle comes from chattel mortgage, and the cattle were the basis of the wealth. Various countries have had practically every type of medium of exchange imaginable. The Chinese, during the imperial system, issued paper money. It was never very successful, nor well appreciated, but it was accepted because it was that or nothing. The actual amount of currency in circulation in China at any given time was based upon the number of deer in the imperial sheepfold and in the parks around the buildings. They counted the deer and then issued the currency. As long as they had the deer, they had money. Of course, the signet of the owner was pressed and dried to make a little kind of exchange item. These were used to buy and sell. When the time came to pay off, they were taken to the steward of the house, who gave them another form of exchange for them. Sometimes currency, sometimes goods that they wanted. So money gradually developed as a convenience and gradually unfolded and multiplied its pressures until it became the world's principal inconvenience. As a convenience, it made possible all types of merchandising and exchanging of goods. It became the basis of a system of exchange in which the individual was paid in a spendable material, which he could use as he must or as he saw fit. In those days, wages were not the problem they are today. In the very early times, money was more or less of a nuisance because no one knew what to do with it. There was nothing to buy with it except what you already had. So for a long time, the situation kind of went along kind of unsuccessfully, until finally somebody caught on to the great idea that instead of making money, the individual could make money make money. This was a great thought and began a cycle of troubles which we may never recover from entirely. Wealth is something